Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Switch to the phone company that supports your beliefs. All plans start under $50 before taxes and surcharges. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special offer.
We often talk about how there's a sign of a great resurgence and renewal happening in the church. There's data showing that young people are coming into the faith in great numbers, and that is reason to rejoice without question. But there is other data. It comes up time to time from different polling firms. They will conduct surveys of self-described Catholics, find out how often they go to Mass, find out if they ever go to Mass, find out if they've left the faith while still calling themselves Catholic to some degree. And that number, that data shows something much different is happening. Yes, there may be a fair number of young people coming into the faith and coming into the most conservative expressions of the Catholic faith, including the Traditionalist movement or just very conservative, ordinary form, Novus Ordo kind of parishes. That's a good news. We have data today that shows that, of course, it's not always good news. And it's gotten the attention of the secular media, which means we should perk our ears up. Headline from Newsmax. Survey, 9 out of 10 Catholics leaving the faith. Now, this was just published a couple of days ago here on Newsmax. Newsmax is what they would call right-wing secular news outlet. And when the secular world is reporting on things going on in the church, we should pay attention to see how they frame things and what the general bent is. There's sort of a narrative. And the problem is Newsmax, being a right-wing news source, is, in theory, not going to be coming against the Catholic Church. Yes, it will come against certain figures in the Catholic Church, certain popes and bishops and things who maybe aren't the most conservative prelates the church has ever seen. But as a general thing, these kind of outlets aren't going to have an overtly anti-Catholic bias unless they are owned by anti-Catholic Protestant types, which is unlikely to be the case. And the report here shows cradle Catholics, 90% of them leave the faith. 90% of cradle Catholics leave the Catholic Church. You should ask yourself why that is and what happened to cause cradle Catholics to leave. So let's go over the details of the story, because then I'll sort of counterbalance it with some good news too. So from the article, quote, more and more Americans who were raised Catholic are leaving the church, according to a recent survey. The General Social Survey found that 62% of Americans raised Catholic said they no longer identified as being a member of the church. That percentage fell from 84% in 1973 and 74% in 2002, meaning it is a continued downward trajectory for the number of Catholics who were raised Catholic who still identify as such. That is a problem. Even worse numbers for the Catholic Church concern Americans raised in faith and still attending Mass every Sunday. In 1973, roughly 34% of all those raised Catholic were attending Mass weekly. That percentage fell to 20% by 2002 and 11% by 2022. Basically, 9 out of 10 cradle Catholics are leaving at a time the church is led by American Pope Leo XIV, who was elevated to his position in May. If these trends continue, then even with ongoing significant levels of Catholic immigration, which mitigate or rather mask our domestic decline, the size of the American church will shrink dramatically in the decades to come. Authors Michael Roda and Stephen Bullivant wrote in the University of Notre Dame's Church Life Journal. Now, I want to pause here because the GSS is a data survey set that I'm actually familiar with. In grad school, I have a PhD in public policy. I know what institutional corruption looks like because I studied institutional corruption. It's why I zero in on certain things going on in the church. But the GSS was a survey set that we would look at in my doctoral program, the previous versions. And the GSS was a data survey set that would go back decades. You could You compare the data in various different surveys, from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s to today, and compare like long-term trends in things. It was considered like the gold standard for academic peer-reviewed data collection. Take this seriously, what they're showing you here. You can use data in evil ways. We know that. You can present data that's gathered well in ways that are completely dishonest, but this is not going to be one of those cases. The data line is pretty significant when you see a consistent trend line through the last half century since basically Vatican II of fewer and fewer Catholics going to Mass, fewer and fewer Catholics staying in the church, and they'll end up formally leaving the church. Take the data seriously, because we've seen this bear out anecdotally. Emptier and emptier pews or parishes, the average age skewing towards older and older people. We've seen this going on for a long time. We all know people who've left the faith. I'll even give you my own example. When I was in grad school, I was a fixture at our local Newman Center. I was also one of the older people there, being, someone who started college a few years older than the average person. And being in a PhD program, I was generally older than most of the people there. But I got to know the Newman Center people pretty well. Fast forward, take a job in Oklahoma, move out of the West Coast, kind of lose track with people, never go on my personal Instagram. And then a few weeks ago, I went onto my personal Instagram, where some of you have found me, and that's fine. I almost never post there. But I checked Instagram, and something like half the people who had been team member Catholic youth leaders at that Newman Center had left the faith. Half. And these are the people who had been at the time so invested in the faith that they were part of the campus evangelization groups, the organizing groups who would hold events on campus and try to bring people into Newman activities so they could enter the church, all this stuff. And half of them had left the faith. This is real. This is a very real problem. And unfortunately, prelates in the church today, going right up to the top, are interested in some rather silly stuff by comparison, worried about the environment and worrying about secular politics instead of worrying about the fact that the church is hemorrhaging membership in North America. Take this data set seriously. I hope the bishops do. Back to the article. Simply put, no realistic amount of evangelizing new people or bringing back those prodigals who have left, mission critical as both those apostolates are, can make up for these kinds of losses. Rhoda, philosophy professor at the University of St. Thomas, and Bullivant, theology and sociology professor at St. Mary's University, examined the decline in religious practice among Catholic-born Americans using GSS data. They suggested that the church, in trying to combat the loss of followers, were to create stronger community ties, especially among children. Before the 1950s, the average Catholic youth would have looked around their social circle and seen a lot of consensus about faith and the importance of worshiping God in some religion or denomination. Rhoda told EWTN on August 13th, "Today, it's not like that. Young Catholics are much more likely to have many non-Catholic friends, probably non-Catholic family members. In the culture at large, there's many anti-Catholic and anti-religious voices. So that puts pressure on youth as they grow up. The Catholic Church, though, is not the only religion suffering in the U.S. In 2013, 72% of Americans considered religion to be the most important thing in their lives, or among many important things. In 2023, only 53% said the same. When the internet hit the scene in the late 90s, we saw a huge spike in the percentage of youth who don't identify with any religion. Human beings are socialized by their families, their close social networks, but also by the culture that they're in. What the internet and smartphones have done is change the balance of what's doing more work," end quote. And this is why internet, I hate the term apostolate, but internet efforts by laymen and by priests are so important. I hate the term apostolate because I really hate when Catholic commentators and influencers call what they do online an apostolate. Give me a break. It's not an apostolate unless you have some sort of formal commission by the church. But we need to really be pushing the faith online and combating a lot of the organized atheistic movements we see. You'll see this in our own, wherever most people watching a channel like this are going to be fairly conservative. But you have to have noticed, if you are participating in a conservative discussion in a secular group and you bring God into it, all of a sudden you get a lot of weird reactions from people who you would think ideologically would be at least sympathetic to our position, if not on board with it. The culture is becoming more and more hostile to expressions of faith, and we need to take it seriously. And that GSS data shows it. We're losing the culture. If we haven't lost it already, after all, the 1960s happened a long time ago, and we're living in the world created by the abandonment of morals at that time, combined with advances in technology that made abandoning morals even more possible for people who maybe knew a few people prior who had abandoned normal traditional moral living. But suddenly when you have when you have advanced communications, you start to see a lot more people have adopted these just disturbing ways of life. Now, that's all, that story is pretty bad, right? But I will give you on the flip side. Palate cleanser time. The Telegraph headline: belief in God doubles among young people. Atheism, the belief of no God, has fallen in 18 to 24-year-olds from 49% in August 2021 to 32%. Now, 32% is still a shockingly high percentage of people who don't believe in God. Shockingly. But it's a good sign. Fallen by almost half. That's not a bad thing. This can continue, especially with younger voices. Like somebody my age is going to have limited effect on young people online pushing and promoting the Catholic faith. Younger Catholic voices need to take to TikTok and take to Instagram and YouTube and everywhere else and push the faith in a way that is understood and communicated in a way that is understood by people in their own age using their own language and all of those other things without compromising the truth. And therein lies the rub. Not because a lot of younger apologists are sacrificing or compromising the truth, but because the message we get from Rome these days is accompaniment, synodality, dialogue, encounter, yada, yada, yada. Not a lot of defend the truth. And it's the truth that will set people free. Telling people the harsh reality of things is often the best way to bring people into the church. It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but if you can effectively communicate the consequences of sin, people will respond. Let's go over the Telegraph article. Well, we would, but apparently when I went over this article yesterday, I used up my last free one I could read. Oh, well. But you get the idea. Belief in God among young people has almost doubled. That's good. That is an unequivocally good thing. It should not be discounted. We should take it seriously, and we should find a way to move forward with it. I'm going to beat a dead horse here just a little bit. If you take a look around you at your average parish, typical ordinary form parish, not talking the clown mass ones, not talking about where, Father X gets up there, Mr. Father FJ gets up there and preaches the Jesuit line of synodal encounters and how the church has always been wrong about certain sins. We're not talking about the depraved priest who probably would have been much happier being a bouncer at a bar or something. We're not talking about him. We're talking about just the typical parish run by the typical priest. You're still going to see the average age skew to older. And we've seen the data. We know where this is heading. If there is not a turnaround at your typical ordinary form parish, the way of life that you know in the church at this point in 30 years will be gone, radically changed. We know that in the Latin West, the only places experiencing any meaningful growth are traditional Latin Mass parishes. You may not like that data, but the average age skews 20 to 30 years younger at those parishes. Young married couples with young families. I don't make this stuff up. It's not my data. I've seen it nearly at every parish I've ever been to. My family and I are on vacation right now. We went to a traditional Mass. parish we'd never been to before, fairly small. And it was still younger looking than most ordinary form parishes I've ever stepped foot into. And I typically go to confession at an ordinary form parish. And yet, you can tell even there where the average age skews. Now, of course, there are ordinary form parishes that have maybe beat the odds, beat the curve a little bit, and have a younger demographic on average than maybe their neighboring parishes too, and that's fine, and praise God for that. But the overall trend line is pretty clear, and this is why it's so perplexing, the hostility we get from Rome and from bishops about the traditional Mass and the traditional Catholic faith. Now, some would say, and I've seen people accuse them, the bishops, of engaging what's called a managed decline, essentially trying to bring the church in for a soft landing to avoid an absolute catastrophic crash. That's why you see the parish clusters happening, parish consolidations, closing of parishes, and all those sorts of things. I would suggest to you that they're not doing a managed decline, that they are living in an alternative reality. They don't believe that there is a real problem going on, not one that can't be fixed with unbridled immigration. They bring in people from Catholic countries thinking they're going to fill the pews with them. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. We have already seen many times, in many cases, that when new arrivals come in, it's not long before they leave the faith. If you don't believe me, go to any real major city and start looking at the Spanish language Seventh-day Adventist and Lutheran and other Protestant denominations that their houses of worship have Spanish language only ones. My area is full of them. See it all the time. We do them no favors. And those are the ones who stay in broader Christianity. We're not even talking about the ones who just leave for unbridled secularism. The bishops need to face reality, that we live in a time of, if it's not the great apostasy, then it's certainly the warm-up act for it. And they have the power as apostolic men who are in the lineage of the apostles, to do something about it, but they choose not to. I'm curious what Kate Pastor says, do you confess face-to-face? No, the one I go to has an actual confessional. Thankfully, I don't do face-to-face confession unless I absolutely have to. And they're valid, but there's something really off-putting about it. Now, I'm going to show you something that the bishops, in their zealotry for secularism, are going to run headfirst into not only a culture of death, which we're already in, but a culture of further dehumanization. We have science fiction news out of China. And I say science fiction because this is stuff that would have only been seen in a science fiction film of some kind. Anything that would have had a dystopian undertone to it. We are entering into the realm of Gattaca or cyberpunk or these other science fiction kind of genres whose underlying message is dehumanization, replacing man with the artificial, turning man into a commodity. And if there were things that the post-conciliar popes and high-profile bishops who were reasonably orthodox appearing were generally good at, was combating this. And the bishops really need to focus, because I'm about to show you a technology that is coming to America without question. This will come here unless we get our lawmakers to step in and say no. Go to Daily Mail with this headline. Would you use a robot surrogate? China develops the world's first pregnancy humanoid capable of giving birth to a live baby. If you don't know what that means, picture a robot that you could have carry a child to term. A robot, not a human being, a robot. This will become the plaything of the rich and upper middle class, and eventually probably available to anybody with a reasonably decent insurance program. This technology will be approved by the FDA at some point. we live in a corrupt enough culture that will happen, especially when even better politicians are recognizing that there is a problem with not having enough kids in this country. And so they start President Trump with IVF, for example. Now he backed off of that, as I reported, and thanks be to God on that. But he campaigned for IVF, saying we want more babies. Well, how about a baby factory? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. A baby factory, right? Something right out of some dystopian science fiction. It should shock nobody that this story is coming from China, where they have commodified their population. It goes back all the way to Mao. They commodified their population, seeing them as instruments for the greater good, as directed by dear leader and the party. In America and in the West, if we instrumentalize each other for personal aggrandizement, for profit, for anything you can think of that isn't recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of a human being as someone made in the image and likeness of God, deserving the full message of the gospel and all the rest of it, regardless of any other characteristic that we may find personally off-putting, that people bear dignity as a byproduct of being made in the image and likeness of God, and God desiring them to come to know, love, and serve him in this world so they can be with him forever in the next. And until we recognize that we live in an age where human dignity has been tossed out the window completely, we can't effectively stop things like this from happening. So here we go. I'm not surprised it's the Daily Mail, because they're kind of a weird mainstream news outlet. But this is something that came across my desk in the last couple of days. Quote, it's a concept that currently only exists in sci-fi movies, but scientists in China are developing the world's first pregnancy robot capable of carrying a baby to term and giving birth. The humanoid will be equipped with an artificial womb that receives nutrients through a hose, experts say. A prototype is expected to be released next year in 2026 with a selling price of around 100,000 yuan, or 10,000 pounds, meaning about 12,000, 13,000 US dollars. This is within the price range of normal people at that price. The doctor who founded the company Kaiwa Technology is developing the machine. The device he envisions is not simply an incubator, but a humanoid that can replicate the entire process from conception to delivery, Asia media outlets report. He said the artificial womb technology is already in a mature stage and now needs to be implanted in the robot's abdomen so that a real person and the robot can interact to achieve pregnancy. I'm going to read that again. He said the artificial womb technology is already in the mature stage and now needs to be implanted in the robot's abdomen, quote, so that a real person and the robot can interact to achieve pregnancy. Now, when I think of interacting to achieve pregnancy, we are generally thinking about activities suited to the married state. Marriage's principal purpose is for the begetting and fostering of children. Take all the time you need to wrap your head around the concept of a doctor, of a scientist thinking this was a good idea, that this could not possibly have unimaginable consequences for people. And this will be approved in the United States without question. Raven Ray, and interact as in physical contact. Yeah, that's what I took that to mean. I don't know how else you could think that. I'd assumed that this at first, that this was talking about how things are done artificially already, which involve, in a laboratory setting, the engaging in the private sin, as Pius XII called it, and giving the sample, we'll say, to the scientific staff, who then go and artificially, in an abominable kind of way, bring life into the world. Bad enough. This, to me, is even worse. Because this is just nothing more than an actual parody of humanity at this point. Now, Von Nobody says this will not work. Women created to be pregnant can't do it because walk on the wrong foot. Well, all I know is because we have imbibed of hedonism, We are all the products of the revolutionary 1960s, even if we were born afterwards. We are all the products of that. Our thinking is framed in that way, either in a full embrace of it or in a reactionary kind of way, or we had embraced it and then we abandoned it. Whatever it is, we all live in the aftermath of that revolutionary period. And this is now the application of advanced technologies to that culture that was born from that period. With regards to ethical and legal issues, the scientist said, we have held discussion forums with authorities in a local province, submitted related proposals while discussing policy and legislation. So yes, to handle the ethics of this, they handed this to the party in charge of China. Of course, because there are no greater moral authorities in the world than that. Experts have not yet provided any specifics on how the egg and sperm are fertilized and implanted in the artificial womb. The doctor's revelations were made during an interview on that country's version of TikTok. News and the development sparked intense discussions across their local social media, with critics condemning the technology as ethically problematic and unnatural. Many argue that depriving the baby of an eternal connection was cruel, while questions were raised about how eggs would be sourced for the process. However, many showed support for the innovation, viewing it as a means to spare women from pregnancy-related suffering. One wrote, many families pay significant expenses for artificial insemination only to fail, so the development of the pregnancy robot contributes to society. End quote. How many great evils have we allowed as a people in the name of sparing ourselves from suffering? How many? Whether it's a mild suffering, say, a man who is in the grips of the private sin, as Pius XII called it, trying to break that habit, and suffering comes with that. And so they give up. And then you get authorities in the church saying, well, it's a habit, so it's not that bad. Just say an act of contrition. We've all heard those stories, all of us. I get emails from young men periodically wondering how they can keep going how they can get to a traditional parish when the nearest one's 200 miles away because every priest in the confessional tells them that garbage. All in the name of sparing you suffering. How many evils in the broader world can you think of because we want to spare people suffering instead of giving them the Catholic answer, which is that the only true alleviation for suffering comes from Christ, and that he commands us to embrace our cross, to pick it up and carry it and follow him, that we can use the suffering in this life for the salvation of others. Unfortunately, this technology is being developed in a country where they don't have any of these concerns, where they are just materialists looking for material solutions to material problems, or material problems as they see them. Because, of course, the problem in all of the advanced countries of not having kids is not a material problem. It's a spiritual problem with material consequences. We have turned our backs on God. We have embraced pleasure at the expense of stability, morality, everything. And the consequences of this, of course, are the crash in the number of babies being born, continually going down. Seemingly, no matter what policy proposal politicians come up with. In Eastern Europe, they came up with some fantastic pronatal policies. Didn't matter. It bumped up the birth rate a little bit, but not enough to be sustainable. Because the problem is spiritual. And therein lies the problem with the country that they are developing this technology in. And the countries they're going to export it to, because let's not kid ourselves here. Sure, the U.S. is a better place spiritually than that country is. That ain't saying much. You have the right to worship if you want. Well, the cultural propaganda systems hammer home the idea that belief is at best a lukewarm thing. God loves you no matter what. It doesn't matter. He'll be fine. He'll accompany you in a synodal dialogue session, even if you are a wretched, unrepentant sinner. Now here, have communion. Now you might be thinking I just said secular, but I gave you a Catholic Church problem there. But where do you think it comes from? The spiritual leaders of our time have all imbibed the errors of the secular world. Hence, the crisis in the church is directly related to this problem coming out of that country. Now, I'm curious what you think about all this. So let me know in the comments. Are you surprised this is coming out of that country? I'm not. Do you see how this is related to everything else going on? I would hope that with the Pope allegedly coming up with a encyclical soon on AI, that he will address this as part of the larger technology problem. Because artificial intelligence isn't a problem per se, because it's not actually art. It's not actually like what science fiction films depict it to be. They're just language learning models. They're complex. They're complex data gathering systems. Is all they are. The AI that we think of from science fiction films is at best a century away. At best, we're not there yet. Anywhere near there yet. And most of the techno overlords who want to push AI fully admit that we are not where, we're not anywhere near a Skynet or a HAL or any of these other famous science fiction AI systems. But you can see where the moral problems come in with AI. And this is part and parcel of the same problem. We have replaced our morality and our moral framework for taking care of problems in the culture with instruments that actually just exacerbate things, make them worse. That's all we've done. Now, let me know what you think of all this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps enormously. And pray for everybody we spoke about today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.